This video is to give you the instructions for the first writing assignment. The assignment is going to be due on Friday, September 30th by the end of the day. Must be turned in before midnight, and any late penalty or any late assignment will receive a 10% late penalty, as with all other late work. The instructions for this written assignment, as for all of the other written assignments in this class, are to write a 800 to 1,000 word paper analyzing one of the arguments that we've covered, in this case, for or against the moral permissibility of abortion. My suggestion here is that you choose the argument that you disagree with more of the two arguments that you have the option of discussing. Your paper is going to need to follow the instructions that I will be laying out here, as papers that do not follow the sort of structure guidelines laid out here will not be accepted. And if your paper is not accepted, then because it doesn't follow the structure guidelines, I'll probably write a note on it and send it back to you. And then you're going to have to resubmit a late paper that does follow the structure guidelines. Also, just a word about this: if you do not complete all of the written assignments for this class, you cannot possibly pass the class. So you want to follow the instructions, because you have to turn something in that follows the instructions to get it accepted in order to pass the class at all. All right, the first thing that you need to do in writing your paper is choose one of the following two arguments to discuss in your paper. Again, it's going to be easier if you choose the argument that you disagree with more. The two arguments that you have to choose between are Thompson's violinist argument and the future like ours argument, or the FLO argument. If you choose the Thompson's violinist argument, that basically says that in some cases it is permissible for an abortion to be had or to happen. And that's supposed to sort of draw parallels between the case in which it's permissible for you to unplug yourself from the violinist, as laid out in the Thompson article that you read. And then the future like ours argument says on the other side that that basically all common cases of abortion are immoral because they involve depriving something of a future like ours. So whichever of those you find yourself disagreeing with more, I suggest that you choose that. Though you can choose either if you think you can write a better paper about that one. But once again, just to be clear, you can only choose one of these arguments. Do not write a paper discussing both arguments. In the beginning of your paper, at the top, should be, of course, your name, a word count, and a title. And then the first thing that you should do in your paper is lay out the argument that you're going to be discussing, which literally just means copy and paste that argument right there at the top as the first part of your paper. In the first substantive written portion of your paper, I want you to then explain the argument that you're going to be discussing, which means a number of things. You need to lay out each premise in such a way that you explain what the premise says, and then explain any assumptions behind the premise, meaning that you need to explain any any relevant moral principles, and give some definitions of words, right? So like if you're discussing what a common case of abortion is, you need to explain what that means. If you're discussing what it is for something to be morally permissible, you might give examples. Be sure to say something about why the premise itself is plausible and why some people believe that premise, believe the premise, like for each premise, basically, right? So when you're laying out the argument, try to describe the premises as best as possible and explain why people believe them. And then be sure in the end to sort of explain why the premise, or how the premises together come together to support the conclusion. In the next section of the paper, you're going to provide a critical response of the argument to the argument that you chose. So what you should be doing is, like, once you've got the argument adequately explained, you need to choose one of the premises in the argument, just one premise, Do not choose more than one premise. And it can't be the conclusion, but it's got to be one premise that you think is false or wrong or implausible or problematic in some way. And choose the one that you think that you have a good reason for thinking that it's false or wrong or problematic, and then give an argument that the premise is false or problematic. Basically, explain why you think that the premise is implausible or untrue, and explain how denying the premise allows you to avoid the conclusion of the argument. Be sure to say something here about why the premise might have seemed true initially, but how it ultimately isn't. Appealing back here to your earlier discussion, why some people might actually believe the argument or believe the premise that you chose in the first place. And then wrapping up in your paper, so once you've denied one of the premises, you are able to deny the ultimate conclusion of the argument. And then you should finish your paper by discussing the position that you end up holding critically. So you might discuss how someone that disagrees with you might respond to the argument that you give. And you might say something about whether or not their disagreement can be addressed. You might also discuss how you might persuade someone that disagrees with you to come over to your side or to believe you in denying the argument that you are discussing. Technical specifications, please use just normal margins and a normal font and normal font size. Make sure to submit your paper in a doc or PDF format on Canvas. And please include a word count with your name at the top of your paper. Just some general rules for writing that I would suggest that you follow. First, try to only say true things. You'd be surprised that students will just put things that they think in their paper without checking them. If you aren't sure whether or not something you've said is true, you should go back to the course material and try and determine whether or not it's true before you actually decide to leave it in your paper. And if you can't decide or determine whether or not the sentence that you've written out is true, then I suggest that you either leave it out of your paper or that you hedge. You say something like, it seems that blah, blah, blah. But that's only when it really is that way. 2, say things simply and clearly. Don't try to be fancy or use any obtuse philosophical sounding jargon. Technical terms should be defined or explained. Just generally try to be as clear as possible in your explanations. 3, make sure that you understand the material that you're trying to explain here and that you write in a way that helps me, the reader, understand your writing and see that you understand the material thoroughly. This is ultimately, I think, the most important part of writing a paper in college. It's showing the person that's grading you that you actually understand. So the first job that you have always in a class like this is to understand the material, but the second job that you have, and the harder part really, and the thing that you have to kind of learn to do in learning to write, is learning to express that you understand the material. If you can figure out how to write that way and it shows your professor that you understand, ultimately that will show them that you have mastery of the course material and you'll end up getting an A. The fourth thing is that I suggest that you structure your paper and be consistent in the use of words and sentence structure. Don't write like a stream of consciousness. Make sure that you proofread after you finished your first draft, and try to make your paper flow from section to section. It helps in making the paper easy to read that way, and your reader will appreciate it. Also, just a general rule of thumb is that editing or proofreading your paper should take you longer than writing your first draft. I think generally writing is about 20% writing and 80% editing. Finally here, for any student that wants feedback, please try to write the word feedback please up at the top of your paper with your name and word count. I usually provide some feedback for everyone on the first paper, but it does take a lot of effort to provide substantive and quality feedback for all of these papers, and some students just don't even look at them or read them, and that's a bummer. Like, it's a bunch of work wasted. So please, if you really do want to read the feedback that I give you, please write feedback, please, on the top of your paper. Finally, also, with respect to office hours, if you have any questions, concerns, troubles, issues writing this paper, you have any problems whatsoever, please do contact me, and we can set up a meeting and hold some office hours, and I can discuss your paper with you. Now, I will not be reading drafts of your paper before grading them, but I am happy to go over your paper during office hours, so we can meet and you can show me your screen or send me a draft via email, and then we can go over your paper line by line, or go over the main themes, or just discuss however you want to discuss the paper. Good luck.